If we look at the left and the right, there are a lot of things we can't disagree on in America, but one thing we do agree on is that our healthcare system as it exists is broken. But when you talk to patients and doctors, it's part of why they're all so excited about AI. AI adoption within healthcare has been faster than it's been in a lot of other traditional industries. So every one of the top 20 pharma companies has announced an AI partnership around AI drug discovery or AI R&D. About 2/3 of all hospitals are now using AI to help them drive their revenue cycle. Healthcare is the #1 employer in America, and every one of us is going to get sick at some point in our lives. So this matters deeply and personally to all of us, and it's part of why we're so invested in the success of AI in healthcare.
So this entire interview series centers around the question of, are we living through exceptional times?
Definitely say this is an exceptional time.
Tell me more about that.
Let's take the US. We know from a demand perspective, demand for healthcare services is only increasing. In 2034, we're projecting that for the first time, we'll be flipping our demographic pyramid. So we'll have more people over the age of 65 than we do under the age of 18. We're calling that the silver tsunami. Right? We also know from a supply perspective that we're projecting to have a shortage of about 2 million healthcare workers in 2030 as well. And those combined, it's no surprise that we're expecting for healthcare to be 20% of our GDP by 2030. And in the backdrop of all this, we also know that our health outcomes are some of the worst within the industrialized world. So that's kind of the macro picture of, we have high spending, almost $5 trillion a year, for some of the worst outcomes, and an experience that most folks do not love, and we have persistent access challenges. Your zip code is one of the biggest predictors of what your health outcomes are going to be in a country that values freedom and equality.
Could you give me the speaking to a fifth grader version of why the outcomes are so bad? Is there a simple answer to that?
I like that. That's a great prompt. So part of it is where we're spending our money. So we spend a lot of money on treatments rather than prevention. And it's part of why this moment in healthcare is so unique, because the problem is massive, the problem matters, but the technology is also very well suited to the moment. I'll give you 3 examples. One is that within healthcare, healthcare data is very unstructured. But AI is very good at joining disparate data sets and working with unstructured data. 2 is that healthcare data is massive. So there's some estimates that say 25% of the world's data is healthcare data. AI is data hungry. And the 3rd is, we talked about these massive workforce shortages. AI can actually substitute for work and augment the work that we're doing.
Where you see the opportunity right now in terms of AI affecting the healthcare system or patient care or the experience?
We'll talk drug discovery first. We know for a fact it takes about 20 years for a drug to go from the bench to the bedside. And we have so many conditions that at the end of the day, we do not have effective treatments for. People who are suffering from types of cancer, autoimmune diseases that just do not have effective treatments, or the treatments they have terrible side effects.
Yeah.
And so what we do want is we want to accelerate that pace of discovery. I've not met anyone who's like, we don't want more cures for cancer. So there's a company called Isomorphic, and what Isomorphic does is they're using AI to design drugs and to accelerate that process of drug discovery. So you have a target, receptor that triggers a cascade to actually treat a symptom. So we're going to use AI to design the best molecule to fit inside of that target to treat that disease. And by the way, if we find that there are side effects, we're going to figure out how do we change that molecule to reduce those side effects. So actually intelligently and intentionally designing drugs, which radically changes the paradigm and lets us speed up the process by which we can get to these new cures.
But then the clinical trial phase is still the part that we can't really change the time frame on that, right?
The clinical trial phase is still long, and there are parts of that are going to sort of stay long.
Yeah, could you have digital twin and run analysis on fake digital humans for any of that?
So there are companies looking at that, and it's not it's not live yet. But the idea being, how do we gather as much data beforehand such that even if we know we're going to have to run this trial for a year, because we need a year of safety data to make sure it's safe, so we can't compress that. Let's run a digital twin. That way we are making sure that we're choosing the patients who will be most efficacious, and so that we have the highest likelihood of success before we put things into that 1-year timeline. Because if we can only run 50 trials this year, let's make sure that rather than 2 of those trials working, if we can get it so that half those trials work, that would still be an amazing uptick. And we have companies like Formation Bio who are saying, let's actually apply AI to every step of this process of the actual process of running the trial so that it's faster, it's lower cost, right, and it's more efficient. And the idea of having lower cost trials is, if I know a trial costs, $30 million to run, I'm only going to actually put certain drugs through it. So there are a lot of drugs that can't be blockbusters, but could probably treat a small population that may not get run because trial costs are so high. Formation says, wow, if we can make trials more efficient to run, we can get these drugs out that wouldn't be profitable enough to bring to market.
Like for rare diseases and things like that.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. So that's in the biotech space. I think, to your point, in the provider space, and I think there are two big problems. One of them is healthcare is supply constrained. That is a fundamental issue with how we design things. People often talk about, why don't we have a more consumer-focused healthcare system? A big part of that is because we've designed it to be supply constrained. So we've said, how do we optimize around the doctor and their time rather than the patient and their experience? So I think a lot about what our companies and what our approach is to actually reduce that and let us have abundance in care rather than scarcity.
So what are some ways that you would see tech, AI, or otherwise solving the supply issue?
So there are two ways to do it. Either one, you're going to use technology that's going to make the doctors more efficient at the core of what they do. So how do we help them treat more people? Open evidence is a tool that doctors use to help them with their diagnosis and treatment. It's now used by almost half of doctors in the US.
What?
So this is ground up. Doctors have found this tool, said, this is amazing, this helps me, I'm using this. So they use this to help them get to the right answer faster.
What kind of data is it fed?
So Open Evidence is a fascinating company. They have partnerships with a lot of the biggest journals in the US, so the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA, so they're pulling from those key data sources to understand what are the latest studies, what are the sort of guidelines, and they're able to pull trusted data, which is part of why doctors trust it so much, because it's pulling from all the sources they would be using. So Open Evidence is making them faster at doing the core of what they do, which is the diagnosis and treatment. I think the other way to do it is you remove a lot of the tasks that you actually don't need doctors doing. So that's, prior auth and phone calls and scheduling and follow-up. There are a lot of great tools that do that. We have another company, Tandem, who's using AI to handle all those prior auth tasks that doctors are often doing on the back end.
You can't invest in everything. What's your kind of criteria focus view?
So there are three principles I often think about when I'm looking at healthcare companies. So one is I like them to be bilingual. And to me, bilingual means, when I'm investing in a healthcare hardware company, I don't want the best healthcare hardware company. I want a company that is independently the best healthcare company and independently the best hardware company. So Neuralink's a great example of that. They're a hardware company that makes an implantable device in the brain. It's quite impressive, and the patients love it. It's changed their life. But when we met the builders at that company, we're investors in SpaceX. So to us, we're saying that's the bar, the hardware bar we hold everyone to, whether it's a healthcare company or not. And the Neuralink hardware builders are at that same level as the hardware engineers from SpaceX. So bilingual, right? You're the best at both of what you do, best hardware and best healthcare. Another is we want something that is both relevant and disruptive. So a company that works in the now, it works with today's business models, it works with today's system, but if it's successful, it's going to change the way that healthcare is delivered. And I think our third is that we want a company that has life-changing potential. So if this company wins, it's good for everyone, it's good for society. We can all sit together and say, we want this to win because all of our lives will be better if this company succeeds. Like there's a company of ours called Cadence. And what Cadence does is they send equipment home with the patient. So blood pressure cuff, something to measure your heart rate, your weights. And what they do is they're collecting that information, monitoring it continuously. And they're using AI to see, wow, your blood pressure's up. We know you have heart failure, your weight's up. Therefore, this is normal variation, you're fine. Or this is high enough that we think a doctor or a nurse needs to call you, or so high that they're going to bring you into the hospital to care for you. So it flips the paradigm of what healthcare has been normally, which is a point in time reactive issue to giving the doctor a capability they didn't have before, the ability to monitor your health continuously at all times.
What's your take on longevity tech?
In the words of Jay-Z, forever young. I want to be forever young. So I'd say one, I'm very happy that it's bringing people to more prevention, more focus, more health. I think if we're looking at how do we change healthcare for the entire population, we got to do it for the people who are already very healthy, the people who are rising risk, and the people who are very sick. We got to make sure we've got interventions for all those folks. There's a company we're investing in that I was also on the founding team of called City Block Health. And City Block Health is focused on the 20% of patients who drive 80% of costs. Those who are extremely sick and extremely needy. When you're able to change outcomes for that population, right, you change the trajectory of healthcare kind of writ large for folks. And I think to me that's an important problem. That's a problem that you really want to bend the needle on. Folks who are kind of already healthy, making them healthier is great, right? There's no qualm there. I think my question with longevity, I think there's a question on whether or not some of these companies are actually making people healthier. And the jury's out. If your data backs up your claims, I'm all for it.
Has anyone figured out hair regrowth yet? Speaking of
I'm waiting on it myself.
So macro trends, you talked about kind of supply, demand, scarcity, abundance issue. Any other macro trends?
So I think one that I'm finding very interesting is the empowerment of the patient. And ChatGPT has really changed the way in which we can do that. So in a lot of ways, the role of the doctor is shifting in this new world from being your teacher who's telling you about your health, telling you the right answer, to more like your coach and your mentor of your health, who I'm supporting you along this journey of which you're in the driver's seat. And I think it's powerful that this tool is changing the relationship between the patient and the doctor in a positive way. We're already seeing that some of the top queries on OpenAI are around healthcare. So we're seeing patients gravitate in that direction. Is this question of how do we create a world of abundance within healthcare services is going to be so powerful and is going to radically redesign so much of how we deliver care. And I think within biotech, the idea that with AI, we can change how drugs are discovered. I think once we're able to sort of remove that bottleneck, I think we're also going to start to see changes across the entire spectrum on how we develop drugs and how we commercialize them as well. So I think the AI is going to create some real opportunities to develop companies, and those two spaces are two I'd be very excited about.
So for you, these are exceptional, interesting times.
Exceptional, interesting times.